They captured birthdays, graduations, and road trips across America. They hung around tourist necks at the Grand Canyon and sat on living room shelves in every suburb. Then, almost overnight, they vanished. Here are 20 camera brands from the 1990s that no longer exist, ranked by the legacy they left behind. Polaroid. For millions of Americans, photography meant one sound, the mechanical whir of a Polaroid ejecting a square of possibility. The Polaroid SX70, introduced in 1972, was nothing short of magic. You pressed a button, and within minutes a photograph materialized in your hand. No darkroom, no waiting, just chemistry and light doing something that felt like a miracle. By the late 70s, the Polaroid 600 series made instant photography even simpler and cheaper. The One Step became a household fixture, the camera you grabbed for birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and Thanksgiving dinners. Through the 80s, Polaroid owned instant photography. The Spectra system promised better image quality. The Captiva offered a sleeker, pocket-sized alternative. Polaroid film became a cultural language. Those white-bordered squares meant memories you could hold. But Polaroid misread the future. While competitors poured resources into digital imaging, Polaroid clung to film. They believed people would always want that tangible instant photograph. They were half right. People did want it, but not enough to sustain a billion-dollar company. By 2001, Polaroid filed for bankruptcy. The brand limped through several resurrections, but the Polaroid that defined American instant photography died in the 90s. Killed by a digital revolution, it refused to join. Minolta. In 1985, Minolta changed photography forever. The Minolta Maxxum 7000 was the world's first commercially successful autofocus SLR. Before it, photographers manually twisted focus rings, relying on skill and luck to nail sharp images. The Maxxum made focusing automatic, fast, and shockingly accurate. Canon and Nikon scrambled to catch up. For a brief moment, Minolta led the industry, but Minolta's history went deeper. The SRT-101, introduced in 1966, became one of the most beloved manual SLRs ever made. Rugged, reliable, and affordable, it taught a generation of Americans how to shoot. Through the 70s and 80s, Minolta built cameras that worked, unpretentious tools that got out of the way and let you take pictures. The Maxxum 7, released in 2000, represented Minolta's last serious film SLR. It was excellent. It was also irrelevant. Digital was coming, and Minolta hesitated. They released the D-Mage series of digital cameras, but the models were clunky, slow, and overpriced compared to Canon and Nikon's offerings. By 2006, Minolta merged with Konica and sold its camera division to Sony. The Minolta name disappeared. Sony inherited the autofocus technology that once revolutionized photography, but the brand that built it was gone, a pioneer that couldn't survive its own innovation. Konica never shouted. It just built excellent cameras and hoped someone noticed. The Konica C35AF, released in 1977, was the world's first mass-market autofocus camera. It predated the Minolta Maxxum by 8 years, yet Minolta gets the credit. That imbalance defined Konica's existence, technically brilliant, culturally invisible. In 1993, Konica released the Hexar AF, a 35mm rangefinder that remains legendary among photographers who actually used one. Quiet, fast, and optically superb, it competed directly with the Leica M6 at a fraction of the price. Professional street photographers loved it. But professional street photographers is a small market, and Konica needed mainstream buyers. The Big Mini series of compact cameras found broader success. Small, well-built, and sharp, they appealed to travelers and casual shooters who wanted something better than disposable junk. But better than junk wasn't a compelling enough story in a market dominated by Canon, Nikon, and Olympus. In 2003, Konica merged with Minolta. By 2006, both brands were gone, absorbed into Sony's digital ambitions. Konica's engineering deserved better. Its marketing never gave it a chance. Yashica. Yashica built cameras for people who loved photography but couldn't afford Nikon. The Yashica Electro 35, introduced in 1966, became one of the best-selling rangefinder cameras ever made. Compact, sharp, and affordable, it brought high-quality photography to the middle class. Through the 70s, Yashica SLRs like the FX3 offered manual control and solid optics at prices that didn't require a second mortgage. But Yashica's real genius was the T4, released in the early 90s. This compact point-and-shoot featured a Carl Zeiss Tesser lens, legendary German glass, and a pocket camera that cost less than $300. It became a cult favorite among photographers who wanted something portable and sharp for personal work. Even today, used T4 cameras sell for absurd prices on eBay. Yashica's downfall came from corporate ownership. Kyocera bought Yashica in 1983 and used the brand to manufacture Contax cameras. By the late 90s, Kyocera saw no future in film. In 2005, they shut down all camera production. Yashica, a brand that democratized quality photography, disappeared without ceremony. Contax. Contax cameras were never for everyone. They were for people who cared about optical perfection and didn't mind paying for it. The Contax RTS, introduced in 1975, was a professional SLR built with Porsche design collaboration and Carl Zeiss lenses. It competed directly with Nikon and Canon's top models, offering German glass and Japanese reliability. The RTS-3, released in 1990, featured one of the most advanced metering systems ever built into a film camera. But Contax's true masterpiece was the G2 rangefinder, released in 1996. Autofocus, aperture priority, and some of the sharpest lenses ever mounted on a 35mm camera. It was a modern rangefinder for photographers who wanted Leica quality without Leica's manual focus dogma. Critics loved it. Sales were modest. The Contax T2, a compact point-and-shoot with a Carl Zeiss Sonar lens, became a status symbol in the 90s. Celebrities carried them. Fashion photographers used them for personal snapshots. At over $1,000, it was the most expensive point-and-shoot you could buy. Contax was manufactured by Kyocera, and when Kyocera exited the camera business in 2005, Contax died with it. Film was finished. Zeiss glass moved to other platforms. The brand that represented uncompromising optical quality became a footnote. Rollei. The Rolleiflex was the camera serious photographers used before Japanese SLRs took over. Introduced in 1929, the Rolleiflex twin-lens reflex camera became the gold standard for medium-format photography. The Rolleiflex 2.8F, produced from 1960 to 1981, remains one of the finest cameras ever made. Diane Arbus used one. So did Richard Aviato, and Rollei also made the Rollei 35, the world's smallest full-frame 35mm camera. But Rollei never adapted to autofocus or electronics. Financial troubles plagued Rollei for decades. By the late 90s, the brand had become irrelevant. Vivitar. Vivitar wasn't about prestige, it was about access. In the 70s and 80s, Vivitar flooded America with affordable cameras and accessories. The Vivitar Series 1 lenses competed with first-party glass from Canon and Nikon at half the price. Vivitar's compact cameras like the PS44 filled drugstore shelves and mall camera shops. But Vivitar never manufactured anything itself. The company sourced cameras from various factories and sold them through mass-market retailers. That business model worked until digital photography arrived. The brand still exists today, licensing its name to generic electronics, but the Vivitar that defined affordable film photography is gone. Kodak Disc Camera. In 1982, Kodak introduced the disc camera system and spent millions convincing Americans it was the future. The Kodak Disc 4000, 6000, and 8000 models were pocket-sized, foolproof, and used a rotating disc of tiny negatives instead of film rolls. Loading film meant snapping in a disc, no threading, no mistakes. Kodak marketed them heavily. Americans bought them. For a few years, disc cameras were everywhere. There was one problem: the pictures were terrible. The negatives were so small that enlargements looked grainy and soft. Even drugstore prints looked worse than standard 35mm snapshots. Photographers hated them. Consumers tolerated them because Kodak said they were convenient. By the late 80s, the disc format was dead. Kodak quietly discontinued it, and millions of disc cameras ended up in closets and thrift stores. The format failed because Kodak prioritized convenience over image quality, assuming consumers wouldn't notice. They noticed. The disc camera's failure foreshadowed Kodak's larger collapse. A company that once defined photography kept making bad bets, and by the 2000s, Kodak was bankrupt. The disc cameras that once filled American households became artifacts of corporate miscalculation. Argus. The Argus C3, introduced in 1939, earned the nickname the Brick for obvious reasons. Heavy, boxy, and built like a tank, the C3 was one of the first affordable 35mm cameras made in America. Soldiers carried them in World War II. By the time production ended in 1966, Argus had sold over 2 million C3 cameras. By the 70s, Argus stopped designing original cameras and started rebadging cheap imports. The Argus name became a label on generic point-and-shoots sold at Kmart. By the 90s, Argus was gone. Chinon. Chinon built solid cameras that nobody talked about. The Chinon CE4 and CP5 were fully manual SLRs that undercut Canon and Nikon on price without feeling cheap. Photography students loved them. The Chinon Genesis, released in 1989, was the company's attempt at autofocus. It was fine. It was also too late. In 1997, Kodak bought Chinon and absorbed its manufacturing capabilities. By 2004, Chinon was dissolved. Ricoh. Ricoh made cameras that photographers respected but consumers ignored. The Ricoh GR1, released in 1996, was a compact 35mm camera with a 28mm f2.8 lens that rivaled anything Leica or Contax offered. It became a cult classic among professionals who wanted something pocketable for personal work. Ricoh never disappeared entirely. The company shifted focus to office imaging, copiers, printers, and business equipment. But the Ricoh camera division that built the GR1 and competed in the consumer market is gone. Pentax Auto 110. In 1978, Pentax did something wonderfully weird. They built the world's smallest SLR system. The Pentax Auto 110 was a fully functional single-lens reflex camera that used 110 film. Pentax created interchangeable lenses, a motor drive, and even a flash system for it. It was a technical marvel. It was also completely impractical. Pentax discontinued it in 1985. Today, the Auto 110 is a collector's curiosity, innovation without purpose. Bell & Howell. Bell & Howell once meant something. Founded in 1907, the company built motion picture cameras that shot Hollywood films and documented World War II. By the 70s, Bell & Howell had shifted to consumer products, but their consumer cameras were mostly rebadged imports. The company licensed its name to low-end manufacturers, trading on nostalgia. The brand still exists, licensing its name to electronics sold on infomercials, but the Bell & Howell that built Hollywood's cameras is gone. Fujica. Before digital mirrorless cameras and Instax film, there was Fujica. The Fujica ST701, released in 1971, was a solid, affordable SLR. The AX5, released in 1983, was Fujifilm's last serious SLR. In 1988, Fujifilm discontinued the Fujica brand and exited the SLR market entirely. It wasn't until the 2000s that Fujifilm re-entered the interchangeable lens camera market with the X-series mirrorless line, Mamiya. Mamiya built cameras for photographers who wanted medium format quality without the cost of Hasselblad. The Mamiya C330, the 645 Super, and RB67 systems offered professional tools at semi-professional prices. Digital killed that niche. Medium format digital sensors were astronomically expensive. Mamiya merged with Phase 1 in 2009. The brand still exists in the digital medium format world, but the Mamiya that built affordable film-based systems is gone. Petri. Petri made cheap cameras before cheap became an insult. The Petri FT was a budget SLR that undercut everyone on price. The Petri 7S rangefinder was a compact alternative to Leica at a fraction of the cost. In the 70s, Japanese import still meant good value. By the early 80s, Petri was gone. The market had matured, and bargain basement pricing was no longer enough. Sears, yes, Sears made cameras. Sears didn't manufacture cameras. They just put their name on them and sold them next to refrigerators. The Sears Tower rangefinders and KS2 SLR were rebadged Japanese imports, mostly Ricoh and Chinon cameras with Sears branding. For Americans in small towns without dedicated camera shops, Sears was the camera store. By the 90s, Sears had exited the camera business entirely. The cameras disappeared along with the catalog. Hanimex. Hanimex was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. An Australian company that rebadged cameras from Eastern Europe and Asia, Hanimex flooded discount retailers with cheap compacts and SLRs. They cost almost nothing. They took pictures. By the 90s, Hanimex had vanished. Today, almost nobody remembers it. Ansco. Ansco was Agfa's American subsidiary, a brand that once mattered and then just stopped. Founded in 1902, Ansco made cameras and film for decades. As Kodak dominated American film sales, Ansco became an also-ran. When Agfa restructured in the 80s, Ansco was quietly discontinued. Ansco represents the companies that just faded. No dramatic collapse, no bankruptcy. They just stopped making things, and nobody noticed. Concord. Concord cameras sat next to impulse buy candy at grocery store checkouts. The Concord IQ and other generic point-and-shoots were the absolute bottom of the market. Plastic bodies, fixed focus lenses, and build quality measured in weeks. They cost $15. They took blurry pictures. Digital cameras killed Concord instantly. The brand disappeared without a trace, leaving behind millions of plastic cameras in landfills. Concord represents the floor of film photography, the absolute minimum required to capture an image. From icons to footnotes, they all vanished, victims of digital, bankruptcy, or irrelevance. Polaroid couldn't adapt. Minolta innovated and lost. Contax built perfection, nobody bought. Which one did you own? Which one do you miss? Drop a comment below, subscribe for more lost American brands, and hit like to keep the memories alive.